Hey everyone, thank you for joining me on this episode of Dharma Junkie. My guest this time was, okay, here's a little backstory. I recorded this episode in January, at the beginning of January, probably right after I relapsed. I had a talk with my guest on this episode, Sharon, and he was a really cool guy. We had a really amazing conversation that was super eye-opening for me at the time, and after going back and listening to it even more so now, I recently tried to contact Will to let him know that I was going to be putting the episode out finally, and just tell him what had happened. But I haven't been able to get in touch with him. And he hasn't posted anything on YouTube in 6 months. He hasn't posted on Facebook in as many months. And I don't think Will is with us anymore. I think Will may have transformed in whatever capacity that is, or what that even means. I don't think Will is of this earth anymore, and I'm regretful for not putting this episode out sooner. But what I can do is post links and guide you to his pages and the wisdom and the knowledge that he possessed. Like I said, this is kind of a hard episode for me to even work on, just knowing that he's more than likely not with us. But I feel like I feel like it's kind of my duty to put this episode out. So I hope you enjoy it. And this kind of just goes to show you, man, that like everybody's not always going to be there. Life truly is impermanent. And it's imperfect. And it's impersonal. But mostly it's just impermanent. And just reach out to your friends and the people you care about. Get in the habit of it, I don't do it enough. I try to call 2 people per day that I haven't talked to in a while and just say hello and ask how they're doing and really like just reconnect with them and try to touch base. And I encourage you all to do the same, because everybody's not going to be here. Everybody's going to die. And I think Will may have. So anyway, thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, review, Without further ado, this was Sharon.
You might catch yourself sliding in and out of a hallucinatory state. Just relax and enjoy it. Just relax and enjoy it.
This is an experiment in mind formation. Information. Forming, controlling, operating your mind and your brain. We're using digital techniques to overload, scramble, confuse, unfocus your mind. The natural state of the brain is chaos. Chaos is beautiful.
Hey, Justin.
Doing all right today?
Yep. How about you?
Man, I am busy. I am like in the process of moving, and like it kind of got sprung on us. It's a long story, man. Our landlord, I have a roommate, and he just sprung on us a few weeks ago. He's like, well, you either have 30 days to find a new place to live, or you have to re-sign the lease, and there's going to be extra $300 a month added to the rent.
Whoa.
So we kind of had to scramble at the last minute and, find a place. And between working full time and doing the podcast mostly full time, and I'm about to start school back on Monday.
Oh,
pretty hectic week. So
God. Did you find a place?
We did. Fortunately, we were able to find a place, and it's actually nicer than the place we're in. So things worked out. But it's right. Just been one of those kind of hectic weeks. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I hear you.
How about yourself? How's the new year been treating you?
Well, I get good, I guess. I mean, I'm always probably doing what you do, right? I make videos, I do Instagram, I see clients, I run classes. It's like, it just continues on in a way. And then we got all this other craziness going on in the world. So,
Right.
yeah, a lot of stuff coming in. So,
Yeah. Where exactly are you located at?
I'm in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Okay.
Where are you?
I'm in the panhandle of Florida and Pensacola.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
So we got a couple hour difference. Yeah.
But so you said clients. So I kind of went over your website a little bit and read your bio and went through that. And you seem to focus on dreams. Correct? Am I correct?
That's right.
In what capacity?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Do you want to say this to the podcast? Do you just want me to tell you now?
Oh, we're going, man.
Oh, we're on. Okay. Okay, cool. So I started out my life, as you probably read in my bio, working in psychiatric hospitals. Mm. And in the whole idea of the therapeutic model, which basically means you have a problem, right? I mean, people I was seeing definitely had a problem. Initially they were locked up, and otherwise they were coming to a clinic. So when you work from the perspective of a problem, the way you look at dreams is that it is your responsibility as a therapist to interpret the dream for the client.
Right.
Okay. So I did that kind of work, in different ways for about 13 years. Then I went into the corporate world, and what was going on was I not only had been hypervigilant in my cognition when I was a therapist, but now I get into the corporate world and I get these big projects and all this kind of stuff. So my view of the world was what I could figure out. Okay. Mm. And fortunately, for whatever reason, I had some skill at doing that. And I was also a trained social worker, so I understood how to get people to work together. When that stopped and I decided I might want to go back to being a therapist and discovered it was going to take me over 2 years to recertify my master's, somebody said, don't do that, get a coaching certificate. Now, there's some really good things about coaching, some other things that I think are really lightweight, but the fundamental idea is you don't have a problem, you have an agenda. You want something. Now, we usually start with what we don't want, right? This sucks, I don't like this.
Right.
But the idea is to move fairly quickly into, okay, we got that. What do you want? So that changed my thinking about dreams 180 degrees, because what you want comes from this place of desire, which is not here. People get stuck in their heads around what they think they want. But you have this whole experience that's a very ordinary, normal experience. It's not mystical or magical or inaccessible, where you dream. What is that? Well, that's your imagination, cooking up a story that's half a conversation with yourself internally. So the reason I got interested in that was because what I discovered is most people who came to me, basically had the equivalence of a PhD in what was wrong with their lives. And that was the prism through which they saw everything.
Right.
This is the problem. And oh, by the way, I did this because I have this problem, and so on and so forth, right? Well, you can stay stuck there, and a lot of people do for their entire lives.
Oh, yeah.
Well, my message is, okay, you know what you don't want. Now let's understand what you do want. And the most direct path I have found is through the dream world, because the dream world usually gives you a dream that says, okay, here's all these frustrations in this dream, and you can't get where you want to go, and all this stuff. Not all dreams, but a lot of them. That's how you're organizing your experience. Is that what you want? And that then, is the beginning of a dialogue that I enable. I'm not the guy telling people what to do. They're telling themselves.
Right.
And I have to tell you, coming from the place where I thought it was my job to tell people what they were telling themselves, it's a huge relief, number one. And number two, it's really amazing. I mean, when you actually listen to someone, it's remarkable what they're able to talk about and what they're able to talk to themselves about. So that's the nature of the work I do,
That's super interesting. Is that based on any kind of like Jungian psychoanalysis? Like,
But here's the thing. I mean, Jung was a genius. I mean, I think he was much more of sort of an alchemist than he was a therapist. A lot of people don't know, but he was a master astrologer for the last 20 years of his life. He always cast a chart for people who became his patients.
Mm.
But I think culturally we have a problem with the whole idea of the analytic model for a couple of reasons. Let's take dreams.
Okay.
The analytic model says, okay, you have this dream. What do we want to do? We want to understand the meaning of the dream. So we go through the dream and we see the symbols and the colors and all this stuff, and we extract meaning from the dream. Oh, this was, and I'm not being facetious here, this is how your father treated you, and this is how you responded, and therefore this is something you can understand. All right.
Right.
The problem is, what we've done is we've taken something that you created in your imagination and shoved it up into your head. Okay, it came from your heart. We put it up in your head. Now you have meaning. Now you have cognition or a way of thinking about something. And what do? You discard the dream. You don't need it. So what I'm suggesting is don't do that. Don't try to extract meaning.
Right.
Understand this as an experience. And let me give you an example. Let's say you get an appointment to meet somebody for half an hour in a coffee shop to see if there's somebody you want on your podcast, right?
Right.
And so you go meet with them, and it turns into a 4-hour conversation. And over the course of the week, because it was a really interesting conversation, you revisit it in your mind. Oh, yeah, you said this, and now I have this other thought, and so on and so forth, right? Mm-hmm. So what I encourage people to do is, your dream's the same thing. Your dream is just another experience that you have that you can go back into. You can re-experience. You can wander around in. You can experience the feelings you felt in the dream again now that you're awake, and let it inform you. Don't extract meaning from it. Let it inform you. Let it live in you. So there's a big difference in terms of what I do based on, and I don't want to tag Jung with this, because I think what's happened with Jung is people have deified him, and people wander around saying they're Jungians, and I don't know what that means, to be honest. But I think what they've done is they've taken a lot of the work he did on symbols and archetypes and so forth and embraced that, which is fine. I mean, I'm just one guy. I have an approach, so I'm not saying everybody else is wrong.
Right.
But it's different what I do than that.
Yeah. And then, there's so many different people, when people try to interpret their dreams, there's so many different interpretations of the same thing. There's all the classic, archetypes, obviously. And then, there's the classic teeth falling out dream that can be interpreted in 1,000 ways. So what you're saying is stop trying to interpret the dreams?
Yeah. And so I'll give you an example of that. There was a woman I was working with. She came with this dream, and I won't go through the whole dream, but she was trying to get somewhere, that the castle where her in-laws and parents were, and she knows she's going to be late. She goes on this path, and she comes across this huge snake that sticks its face right in her face, and so frightened she wakes up. Okay. So she came, told the dream, and said, I think the snake is my father. Now, it's not my dream, okay?
Right.
But I just asked her, okay, would you be interested in more? I mean, let's accept it's your father, but would you be interested in more? Sure. Well, we went back into the dream, and using something, and Jung came up with this actually, something called active imagination. We actually had a conversation with the snake. Turns out the snake was within her. The snake was trying to get her attention because she was running around taking care of everybody else. And the snake in her was saying, wait a minute. I live in you. I am this energy, this power in you. She didn't like that initially. She didn't want a snake in her. She would have been happy with a panther or something, but not a snake, right? But then as she began to work with it, she began to understand, oh, wait a minute, there's this part of myself that I'm ignoring. Okay. So we go from the meaning of the snake to the experience of the snake, right? Because the meaning's external. That's somebody else thought that up, right? Somebody else said snake could be any one of the following 50 things. Pick one, right? But when you go inside, you realize you cast this animal in your dream. This is yours, not anybody else's.
Right.
And I think that's the thing that, to be honest, I think that's one of the fundamental issues in our culture today, Justin. It's that we are more than willing to give up our sovereignty to somebody else to tell us what's what. Because then we know, right? Then it's like we got the information up here and everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is that's not who we are. We live in this internal process that's really pretty amazing. I mean, if you expand your idea of who you are past what you think, I mean, the human experience is astonishing and really interesting. And, the idea that life is short becomes a silly saying. Life is not short. Life is incredibly long if you live it. You have experience after experience after experience. So, just like you were saying, this week has been a lot of external stuff, but the fact that you navigated it and are in fact in a better place tells us, oh, wait a minute, you've got this internal guidance system that you can deal with the incoming, right? Because you're centered in something. Other people who don't have that really get whacked around by life a lot. And life is tough,
For sure.
There are times, so yeah, I think really if there's any message I want to get across to people is that dreams are a very ordinary part of your life. You can either pay attention to them or not, just like anything else.
Right.
But if you pay attention to them, they're pretty interesting.
So myself, I have a pretty difficult time remembering my dreams for the most part. And I'm pretty sure that's fairly common.
Yeah.
Would you have any tips for people, even myself, that to just maybe help them remember their dreams? I know that, waking up and writing them down is probably the best method because, it's still fresh. And I know that if you lapse even a little bit, you're going to forget it almost immediately. So I'm other than that, I don't really know any, techniques as far as recall for my dreams. But would you have any tips on that or?
Yeah. I mean, I think, and I'll come back to what you said, but that is important. You got to write them down. But the first thing I think is, let's talk about what you're trying to remember. I mean, you say it's a dream. It's actually a story.
Okay.
You're trying to remember a story that you created that means something to you. Now, I use the word means, but is important is probably a better way to say it.
Right.
So the first thing is, what are you trying to remember?
Yeah.
The second thing is, unfortunately, a lot of us live with these things called alarm clocks, which are a relatively new invention. And a very unfortunate one, because what happens? You're sleeping and bam, now you're awake because this jangling goes off, right? That makes it tough because the best way to wake up is slowly, 5 minutes. You begin to come back into the waking world. And if you just stay lying down for 3 to 5 minutes and not jam, your day into your head of, oh, I got to do this, just let yourself wake up. It's a lot easier to access whatever dream you had. So those are actually really important things. Sort of respect the idea of waking up. Now, if you got to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning every day and you don't wake up, okay, unless you can get somebody to wake you up by just sort of reaching in and grabbing your foot, which is the best way to wake somebody up. That you're not shoving them around or anything.
Yeah.
But that's really the key, is if you can wake up slowly, and by that I mean 3 to 5 minutes, you have a better shot. The other thing I always say to people when, I go to a party and somebody goes, oh, I love to work with my dreams, but I never remember them. I go, you know what? Make an appointment with me. What happens? This part of you all of a sudden has an audience, right? You got to go see this guy Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock and tell him a dream. Okay, great, cool. Now that part of you says, cool, we got somebody to tell this to. So it's never failed. People show up with a dream. So audience is important. And that's why, if you're not going to see me, which all your listeners can't because I don't have enough time, but join a dream group, get a friend who you will share dreams with. And there's the whole idea of how do you listen to a dream, which we could talk about. But it's really creating an audience for this, because you're right. It's tough on your own when you're not sure what the heck it is you're trying to remember and why you're remembering it. And then when you did remember it, what the heck, now what? I don't know what this means, which is another reason why writing the story down is really important, because not only do you have a record of it and you can go back to it, but now it's a story. Doesn't make any sense, but it's got a beginning, middle, and an end. It's got characters, it's got a location, and it's something you can recall. So it's remembering, writing, and telling is really the three steps. And to your question, how do you remember? It's really about creating an audience, which I think is really important. And it's really about understanding in yourself that you're telling yourself a story that's interesting and that it's worth remembering.
Okay. I had another question. Is it, maybe it's just because maybe it's just the fact that, as I said, a lot of times I have a hard time remembering them. It seems other times that I just don't dream. And I'm not sure whether that's the case or not. Maybe I am dreaming and just not remembering it. But it seems that a lot of times I don't dream. Do you have any advice for maybe creating a more fertile ground for dreaming? Is there any?
Well, think about it this way. Your consciousness, and I don't use terms like subconscious and unconscious. We could talk about that. But your consciousness is vast. Right. And you can't focus on all of it all the time. And one way to think about this is that there is sort of this dynamic conversation going on between your waking life and your sleeping life, or day school and night school, if that's a useful metaphor. Okay. Insight, which is what dreams give you, without action is meaningless. It doesn't get you anywhere. And again, not to get overly critical of the therapeutic model, but I think it suffers from that sometimes. So when you don't remember your dreams, not always, but sometimes it's because you are taking action on the insight. It's a feedback loop, right?
Okay.
You get insight, you take action, that gives you experience, that goes back into your dream world, goes, oh, okay, cool. Now you've changed your perspective. Now let's work on this piece, right? This other thing that comes up. So it's not unusual at all for people to sort of dream, not dream, dream, not dream. It happens a lot. And, again, when people are working with me, they get upset. They go, well, I don't have a dream this week. It's like, oh, that's fine. It's not all solely about your dream world. It's about your waking world too. It's important. We're not trying to get rid of your ego here. Your ego is important.
Right.
It's just not the only thing.
Right. So in what ways would you say that the waking world and the dream world kind of coalesce?
Well, I think it's changing, to be honest. In simpler times, if we can remember simpler times,
right.
What mostly was going on is that people were looking at behaviors in their dreams that were standing in their way of the next larger version of who they are, right? Because we're all trying to step into the next larger version of who we are.
Right.
Now it feels to me, and I see it in people's dreams, what's happening is, and this is regardless of whatever political persuasion you have, it doesn't matter. A lot of what we thought was true, and you can look anywhere you want, medicine, race, economics, wherever. A lot of what we thought was true turns out not to be true.
Yeah.
And so instead of the dream world disorienting us so that we can move forward, the waking world is disorienting us. It's demanding that we look at things. And the response to those, the response can be all over the map, rejecting them, embracing them, being confused, being ashamed, whatever. That's the waking life now. It's almost impossible to avoid. So what are the dreams doing? In a funny way, the roles have shifted. The dreams now that I work with are trying to orient people back into their humanity. The understanding that there's a lot we don't know, and I'm not just talking about the mysteries of space or under the earth. There's a lot we don't know about how we behave in the world and how it impacts other people. And that's uncomfortable. We'd rather know who we are, have our identity, and this is who we are, and this is how we behave, and so forth. But clearly, all of that's being challenged. And I'm not, I don't have an agenda here. I can't have an agenda given the work I do. That's not my job. Right. My job is to understand other people's agendas, let them understand what they are. So there's been a shift. And I expect this year, we've obviously lived through COVID, which was very restricting and
Absolutely.
And constraining. This year, as we begin to emerge literally back into the world, all that awareness is going to be there. And I expect this year to be fraught in a lot of ways. And the old saying, you can't change without destroying the old way. And by destroying, I don't mean destructive, tearing things up or anything, but the idea of a construct has to collapse before you can create a new one.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what's happening. It's happening individually with the people I work with. And, my particular view and the sources of information that I get basically tell me, okay, buckle up, because there's a lot of stuff that's not sustainable anymore.
Right.
Right. So yeah, I think the role of dreaming has changed in a way.
Yeah, you brought up something earlier, and it was the things that we had previously taken as fact.
Yeah.
Are changing across the board at a fairly rapid rate. And it seems like the narrative that people have been living, they're suddenly realizing that maybe that's not exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. It can be very disorienting for a lot of people, I think. That sudden realization that something that they had believed to be true for possibly their entire lives, all of a sudden is like, whoa, no, it's actually not that way.
Yeah, it's totally true. And one of the things I did for about 12 years, first at JP Morgan and then at PricewaterhouseCoopers and then in my own firm, is I worked in an area called risk management. Mm-hmm. And once I left Pricewaterhouse, there's an old rock and roll expression saying I couldn't get arrested, meaning, no matter what I did, I couldn't get anybody's attention because it seemed to me that what's risk about? Well, if you go in the financial services industry, what risk is about is making sure you don't lose anything, right? Basically making sure it's the other guy who's going to lose something. And what I was saying was, well, that doesn't make any sense because you're operating based on what's happened in the past. You don't want the bad stuff that happened in the past to happen again. Right. It's a fool's errand. The bad stuff that happened in the past is going to happen again, right? It just is. And probably it's going to happen in a way that you don't fully understand. So what might be more important is to figure out what has to go right, whether it's in your business or in your personal life or whatever. What has to go right for you to get what you want? And in order to do that, you got to get everybody in the tent. You have to tell everybody, this is what we want to do. Now you got to tell me what has to go right in your area, in your area, in your area, and so forth, right? And now you got everybody wanting the same thing, desiring that part of us that comes from the non-cognitive place. And so when bad stuff happened, everybody was together and they could figure out what to do. Okay, that idea of risk went nowhere. It's the same thing in terms of what's going on in our culture today. People want to stop bad things from happening, like oh, we should be able to print money forever and ever and ever as much as we want, and everything's going to be okay.
Right.
Okay. I mean, just, read a beginner's book on monetary systems.
Right.
That ain't going to happen, right? You know it, I know it.
Yeah.
But the culture at large doesn't want to pay attention to that. So that's going to go boom at some point, probably not so long from now. We've seen, in terms of race relations, the largest demonstrations in the history of the United States, and maybe even in the world, as a result of the George Floyd murder. Now, a lot of people would like to say, oh, well, that was an event, tra-la-la-la-la, everything is okay, and we're just going to move forward. I don't think so, right? Yeah. There are all these things that are very present in our lives that we don't want to pay attention to. So you can think of this on a level of a country or a business or a person. Events shape things. Policy doesn't. Right. Okay. We can have all these policies and stuff, but events change things. I always think of, we're off the subject of dreams, but whatever. I always think of Lyndon Johnson, right? This guy's from Texas, for God's sake, right? What does he do? He passes the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Why? Because he saw the country was going to explode if they didn't do something. I would suggest to you, FDR was the same. He saw the country was going to become socialist unless he did something. Right. So it's events, it's us individually and collectively that decide, and then leadership responds. Is really if you look at history, that's what happens. Yeah. And, I know people, I like them, they're friends of mine, and I feel bad because I feel like they're going to have a rough year. They're insisting on things being the way they think they should be, and it's like, okay,
right, yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong. That's always possible. I could be totally wrong.
Right.
But I don't think I am. Yeah. In which case it's going to be a rough year,
Yeah. I've got a lot of friends like that myself. I just don't think they see it coming,
Yeah.
It's unfortunate because it's kind of like right in front of our faces. But,
well, the other thing I got to say, in my life, there's a lot of stuff I haven't seen coming either.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Man,
so,
I've taken off guard more than a few times.
Right. Take your move, right? You guys didn't see that coming.
Oh, yeah.
And so, but what happens is when you become aware of that you're not going to see stuff coming, so that when it does, it's kind of like, okay, how am I going to deal with this? Not that this is not fair and I didn't do anything wrong and we should go get the guys who did this and put them in jail, and all that stuff doesn't get you anywhere, right? No. What will get you somewhere is to say, all right, this is an opportunity for me to understand who I need to become, how I need to deal with this. So I think it's important for all of us to sort of cop to that and not point the finger at people who we say, well, you just don't get it yet, because we don't get it yet either. Sure. I don't know how the hell this is going to play out.
Man, I don't know how tomorrow is going to play out. much less anything on a grander scale than that.
Right.
But yeah, I think, especially within the last year, we've seen just so many really heavy things happen that nobody saw coming, but I don't think it's going to stop. That's just the nature of the beast. History, repeats itself over and over and over again. And that's not even saying that the same things will happen. That's just saying that, like, people have this idea that that life is supposed to be this happy experience, and it's most of the time it's not to say that there's not joyous moments, but there's always going to be the negative experience. It's going to catch you off guard. That's just not.
Well, yeah, or an experience, whether it's positive or negative.
Yeah, whatever connotation you put on it, it's your perspective that it dictates that, for sure. No.
One thing I would say is that Yeah, history does repeat itself. The issue in the moment, though, is that we have created a number of existential threats to literally the continuation of the human race. I mean, we got 14,000 nuclear bombs in the world.
Right.
It's amazing to me that nobody's set one off yet. And you can you can look at the food source. You can look at a number of different ways in which we can do some serious damage to ourselves.
Right.
So, which didn't exist, 150 years ago, certainly back into history.
Yeah. So
in a way, we're at a point where history can't really quite repeat itself, because if it does, we may not be here. So the question becomes then, well, what do you do? What do you do? What do I do? I'm sitting here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, right? I don't have any control over nuclear bombs. I don't have any control over the food source. I don't have any control over a lot of this stuff.
Right.
So what do we do? Well, you kind of have to buy into this idea that we are more than we think, literally. And I mean that literally. I don't mean metaphysically. Yeah. That there are aspects of our experience that are not cognitive, that are energetic. So if I become the best human being I can be on any particular day, and you do the same, and other people do the same, that's energetic. That's the George Floyd demonstrations, right? That energy that went around the world, that kind of everybody went, oh, okay, this is different than all the other people that have been shot by the police. Right. This is different. Something's happened here, right? And that doesn't go away. That's cumulative. And that's what people can do. They can be human. And the thing that stops us is, frankly, watching CNN and MSNBC and Fox and yelling at the TV and thinking we're doing something. We're not doing anything, right? What we need to do is be who we are. And who we are is flawed, because when you step into who you are, other people go, hey, that part of you, that sucks. I don't like that. And we got to deal with that, right?
Yeah.
If we do what you were just describing, which is say, okay, I'm good. I got all my insurance policies. I got income. I got a house. I got a wife and kids.
Right.
I'm cool, right? I got everything I need.
Right.
Then bad stuff happens. And not that it wouldn't happen anyway, but it's going to happen in a way that's going to be very difficult to deal with. So, which then cycles me back to dreams. Why do I work with dreams? I mean, and the struggle here is, I think, the struggle we all have, which is, how do I convince people that this is a very ordinary experience? How do I get people out of this idea that they need some expert to tell them what their dreams mean? How do I get them to understand that the telling of the story, the telling of that story they made to another person who will actually listen to it, is really part of being human, and gives you access to part of your experience that's very informative, that allows you not to be so frightened.
Right.
That's the gig.
Okay. Kind of makes sense. I'd definitely have to sit and talk to you at length for it to make 100% sense to me, but it definitely does make sense. But yeah, so fear, basically, is what you're saying. I think a lot of people operate out of fear. And I think, it's pretty well known that, well, maybe not very well known. I personally believe that a lot of emotions stem from that fear base. Hatred stems from fear, anxiety, fear. Depression, in a sense, is, the fear of the outcome of something that has happened,
Yeah.
And it's all just fear based. So it's.
Yeah, and I think, you make a good point in the sense of fear and anger, because we don't like fear. Nobody likes to be afraid unless we pay for it. We go on roller coasters, we read Stephen King novels. That's okay, because we know what's coming, right?
Right.
When you have a nightmare, you don't like that, because first of all, it happens to you and you didn't ask for it.
Yeah.
Right. So now events in the world frighten you. What happens? Like that, you go to anger.
Yeah.
Because anger, you know, and anger is a force, whereas fear is disabling. Fear is immobilizing. Nobody likes that. So we don't want to stay in it. But if you do stay in it, and that's what your dreams will do sometimes if you do have a nightmare, the fear is trying to inform you. Why are you so frightened? I don't know, let's pick something, of homosexual people. Why does that scare you so much, right? Well, the Bible, blah, and I'm not picking on anybody.
Right.
You got all these reasons. But underneath that, it's like, I'm afraid of that because I don't know what that is.
Right.
Okay, guess what? Good for you. You don't know what that is.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's who they are. You're you. You
Right.
just accept them, they'll accept you. You don't have to be afraid of it. Nobody's going to attack you.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know what it is, and therefore it's wrong and bad because it's scaring me, and we got to get those guys, right? And so fear, it's interesting because there's a woman, who's a client of mine who's actually left the country, and she's in a foreign country where the economy is based on tourism, and they're locking the citizens down and letting the tourists come in. And she's furious. Not because it impacts her. I mean, she's an artist and she can do her art in her house, so it's not a big deal. But it makes her angry because she sees this situation that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's a couple of things there. First of all, it's frightening to her because she has no control. It's frightening to her because she thinks other people are going to get sick. But guess what? There's another perspective here, which is that these people can't make any money unless there's tourism. So they're screwed either way.
Yeah.
And they're trying to figure it out. And they're human and they're going to make mistakes. And that's kind of where we're all stuck, right?
Yeah.
But the anger comes from the fear of not having any control. And it comes from the fear of this idea that other people have control over us. You know, we don't like that. And guess what? Most of them are doing the best they can. Nobody really knows what the heck this thing is. I'm convinced of that. You know, I mean, yeah, people get flu-like symptoms, but there's so many other things that are going on in terms of organ damage and taste and all this stuff.
Right.
Anyway, the point is that fear is a symptom, right, of something underlying. And it, you know, just like I'd like people to pay attention to their dreams, I'd really like people to be not so frightened of fear, to experience it, to see it as a human emotion that is trying to inform them of something,
Right.
trying to inform them of something that makes them very uncomfortable and disoriented. Because that's how you grow, man. I mean, you know, like you were saying, it's like, you know, life is not a, bowl of cherries at all. But guess what? It's really interesting.
Yeah.
If you're willing to live it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's definitely I'd say the more tedious or uncomfortable parts of life that are definitely where you get your growth at. You know, and those are your learning experiences for sure.
Yeah.
And you said something that really, really resonated with me. And it's, I think when we were talking just as an example about homosexuality, I think people just fear the unknown, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it all boils down to. If they don't have any experience with it, or it's completely foreign to them, there's going to be a bit of fear involved. And that can be, with any variable we wanted to attach to it, whatever, ideology or whatever it is, for the staunch Trump supporter, socialism is definitely a spot of fear for them, and vice versa, So it's just people, in my experience, just if they don't have any experience with it, if they know nothing about it, then it can definitely be a fearful subject. And so much of life is the unknown for people. Well,
here's the thing. So we speak the English language, right? There's roughly, I think it's 187,000 words in the English language. You and I know about 30 or 40,000 of them.
Right.
70% of those words are nouns. So the problem that we suffer from through our language, and by the way, Spanish has 100,000 and Portuguese has 40,000. So we got a ton more words than a lot of other languages.
Oh, yeah.
Problem is we name experiences. So you just said socialism, okay?
Right.
I would hazard a guess that if you sat 100 people in a room and said to them, all right, give me a definition of socialism, everybody be all over the lot. I mean, I'm not even sure I understand what socialism anymore. I know we don't live in a capitalist society anymore. We don't have markets that reflect value. You know, I could go through that because, you know, like I said, I've got experience in the financial services markets.
Right.
But we name these things and then we stop thinking about them because now we got a name. Socialism bad, capitalism good. We're good. That's all we need to know, right? And when I was two experiences around this. So when I was a consultant, I used to go into, you know, companies and I was doing operational assessments and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And they would have all these acronyms, right? So an acronym is like, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 letters, right. And each letter it represents a word. And I would say, oh, what does this mean? Nobody knew. They just knew the acronym. They didn't know what it meant. They certainly didn't know what the words were. And I would get 3 or 4 or 5 different stories about what that acronym actually meant.
Right.
Same thing with clinical diagnosis. I started off working in a psychiatric hospital in the children's unit, right? Every one of those kids was diagnosed as schizophrenic. Now, I don't know if your listeners know, but most schizophrenia, the onset of most schizophrenia is late teens, early 20s. There is a childhood schizophrenia, but it's relatively rare. And looking back now with this experience, I can tell you with 100% certainty, those kids were not schizophrenic. They were really pissed off. Mm-hmm. They had some, you know, what we would call personality disorders, but they were not schizophrenic. But they had been labeled so that people didn't have to think about anymore what their problems were because schizophrenia was incurable and they were locked up and that was the end of that, right? So that's another issue that we have to deal with, which is that we name our experiences rather than describing our experiences.
Okay.
Right? Again, that's why I work with dreams. Why? Because they're described, it's a story.
Right.
It lays out for you an emotional experience that you are trying to get your attention on through your dream. Right. So it's not, you know, your dream doesn't say, oh, Trump is bad. Next, you know, that's not what's happening. You're telling yourself a story. So I think because of our language, we create real problems for ourselves because we stop thinking as soon as we label something.
Right. Yeah, that I can see how that would put us at a pretty heavy disadvantage.
You know, I got to tell you something else along those lines. So there's something called confirmation bias. Okay. Mm-hmm. So it was discovered at Stanford University in 1975. So what's confirmation bias? And you're going to recognize this. If you don't know the term and your listeners don't, you're going to recognize this immediately. So you have a belief, right? And I come along and I show you 10 peer-reviewed studies that show you conclusively that your belief is wrong.
Right.
You reject them. Then I come along with some half-baked rumor from a dubious source that supports you and you embrace that.
Yeah.
That's called confirmation bias, okay? And in the literature, up until 3 years ago, it was seen as a failure of reason. It's like, well, why would any rational person reject, you know, clearly valid information, right? Mm. Okay, now fast forward to the last 4 years, right? Well, there's a lot of confirmation bias on both sides, right? I'm right, you're wrong.
For sure.
Okay? So there's a couple of guys who said, you know, there's an awful lot of failure of reason going on here. Maybe we ought to look at this again. And they basically realized that actually confirmation bias is not a failure of reason. It is the purpose of reason. Why? They took us back to the hunter-gatherers, right?
Okay.
It was the beginning of developing cooperation in a society.
Right.
And anybody who's ever been in a group or tried to start a group knows that it takes a lot of effort to get people to cooperate. And it takes a lot of effort to get them to continue to cooperate. So this part of our brains, this rational part of our brains, really was developed to make an argument. We got to go on the hunt. Frank wants to stay in the cave. We got to go say to Frank, oh, no, we could kill him, but then we'd be a man down. We need Frank. So we say, look, Dopey, if you don't come, you don't eat, right? That's a very simple example of an argument.
Yeah.
Here's the consequence of not coming.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't some rational explanation of the group and the need to for us all to do the same thing. It's like, no, here's the rule. You don't come, you don't eat. As we began to get more and more complex societies, we needed more and more arguments about why we should all behave in a certain way. Mm. So these guys basically said, that's the point of reason. It's not to objectively evaluate information, it's to make an argument. Now, when I read that, I thought, oh, wow, now I get it, right? Mm. So what we see going on in our culture, these supposedly reasonable people, they're making arguments. Now, what do? Well, in science, we develop a scientific method. You do an experiment, some guy, halfway around the world who doesn't have a dog in the fight about whether you're right or you're wrong, replicates what you did, he gets the same result, boom, now we got a fact, okay? Right. It's not a question of your argument or anybody else's, we've replicated it, so we know it's true, okay. Or at least it's true for now. That's one way. Empathy is another way. Why? Because it has nothing to do with what we think. It has to do with what we feel. Compassion, another way, right? So that's why we need this non-thinking part of our human experience. It's vital, because otherwise, all we're going to do is argue with each other, because that's how our brains are constructed.
Right.
So it's like, you live a life for a while and you think you kind of know what's going on. And then, you read somebody like these guys and you go, oh man, of course, makes total sense. I get it now. Reason is not bad, but reason is far from the only game in town,
Yeah, the human condition's it's an interesting thing, man. People, you just said it, people just inclined to argue.
Yeah,
it seems. What is that, man? I mean, what's your opinion on that? Why do you think people are just so apt to cling to that? To debate and argue and.
Well, because I think it gives us sort of a false sense of security.
Do you think that people, at least some people, are looking for more understanding and that's the reason they debate, and some people are just inherently just assholes?
Well, let's see. I mean, it's funny. I obviously have a different approach to dreams than a lot of other people do, and I've been invited periodically to debates, and it's like, I'm not interested. I'm not interested because I'm not trying to argue against anybody else.
Right.
That's cool. You got a way to do it, and people, that works for people. That's cool. Right. It's not what I do. Okay. So debates in any forum, I find kind of tedious, because all they are is, a bunch of people exercising their egos.
Yeah.
My guess is that the reason that we like to argue is, again, it gives us this false sense of security. And look, I was a guy who argued a lot in my life. I actually went to law school for a year and a half. And fortunately, a year and a half in, I thought, because reading the law is really fascinating. It's a bunch of stories, basically.
Yeah.
But a year and a half in, I thought, oh man, wait a minute. What this is about is me arguing with people for a living. I'm not so sure that's a good thing for me to do. For me.
Right. Yeah.
I'm glad we have lawyers. That's a good thing. But what do? They make arguments. It's like, oh my God, really? I mean, I can't do this all day long. It's just exhausting. But arguments make us feel secure because we have figured something out. Right. There's a group of people. It's called the intellectual dark web. And
I'm familiar.
What? Say again?
I said I'm familiar.
Yeah. And so, I've listened to a bunch of those guys, and they are all guys, as far as I know. They're all, except there's a woman who's married to one of the Weinstein brothers. A woman. That's the only woman I know who's part of it. Right. And
Was it Eric Weinstein that coined that term?
yeah, it is. Right. Yeah. And in and of itself, it's kind of an ego trip, right? Oh, we're the intellectual dark web. It's
Right.
like somebody said, as soon as you named it, it was dead. It's
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
but the more I listen to these people, and they're interesting, they're very smart, interesting ideas.
Right.
But I thought, this isn't going anywhere. This is just a bunch of smart people arguing with each other. That's not what this is. To me, that's not what this life experience is about.
Right.
Really not about arguing with each other. It's about being human, having that experience. Right. And yes, we got to use this part of ourselves to negotiate stuff, because I may not be comfortable in somebody else's culture who wants to stay up late at night, or, when I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, which is what I do. Right. So I'd have to negotiate that. I'd have to, come to some kind of an agreement or a conclusion or something. That part of us is not a bad thing, but it's so much not the only thing. It's really much more about the human connection and understanding each other, or trying to understand each other.
Man, I couldn't have said that better, man. Because for me personally, that's what life is about. Life for me is about connection with other people. Yeah,
I know this is your thing, but I wanted to ask you a question. It's
sure.
Like, so you started this podcast. What caused you to start this podcast?
I am in addiction recovery, and
Okay.
I mainly started it as a forum to really kind of open up the dialogue about addiction and things of that nature. It was more of an idea to just talk about things that are uncomfortable for people to talk about, and kind of break the stigma around those things. Because especially with addiction, people, once you're labeled an addict, people, not all people, but a vast majority of people tend to look down upon you. They think there's something inherently flawed with you, and you're just this piece of shit addict, and that's you from now on. And there's so much more to people. And it's like, well, why did they end up in this position? What put them there? Why was that what they resorted to? And I kind of wanted to just break, whether it be addiction or anything else, it's more just about opening up the dialogue, and by doing so, kind of breaking the taboos about it, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah. Addictions.
Then I really enjoy just talking to interesting people such as yourself. So
I appreciate that. Addiction is an interesting thing. Now I don't have that. Well, okay, here's what I was going to say. I don't have that gene, except I don't think that's true. My addictions through my life have been probably more socially acceptable than yours. Right? We can be addicted to alcohol, and unless it really gets out of control,
right,
that's acceptable. We can be addicted to sex, and unless that really gets out of control, that's acceptable. And that, from my frame of reference, I'd be curious what you think about this. Let's take those two things. What are they about? From my perspective and my experience, they are about an escape avenue that feels good. Yeah. That I want to feel good, right? Yeah. And I don't feel good. So if I have a lot of sex, at least in those moments, I'm going to feel good. Or if I, have 2 or 3 glasses of wine every night, I can't do that anymore, but there were days that I could back in the day. Right. That's going to make me feel good. Now it doesn't. Ultimately, it doesn't.
Right.
But there's that impulse. And my sense of it was that it's because I'm not really connected to the parts of my experience that made me feel really bad.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, I follow, for lack of a better term, I guess I would consider myself a Buddhist. And I don't know if you have studied Buddhism at all or read
I know a little bit about it, but I'm not.
Well, the whole thing behind it is like there's the 4 noble truths, and the first one is that there is going to be suffering in life. That's inherent suffering. You're going to get sick. You're going to age. You're going to die. These are, just fact. You can't escape them. Those are three things that are going to happen to you. They're going to happen to everybody. And that the second noble truth is that the cause of that suffering, not the inherent suffering, but the rest of, the other suffering in life is basically it's the inability to accept things the way they are and looking for that change, something to change that, the idea of suffering, something to make you feel better, just as you said, whether it be sex or drugs. It's something you're looking to change, whatever negative aspect is going on in your life by clinging to some more joyous, happy aspect of your life. So say you're having a bad day. Well, if I have a drink, then I'll feel better. So there's that, and it's basically what it is, just learning to accept things in the way that they are, just accepting the reality of the situation and not trying to cling to something to change that. You know what I'm saying? It's just accepting life as it is without trying to change it with whatever your choice addiction is, whether it's alcohol or drugs or sex, and they can be healthy addictions too. They can be going to the gym or any outside, basically any outside source. You know what I'm saying? If you're looking outside of yourself for something to make you feel better, then you're kind of screwed in my estimation. You've got to just kind of learn to accept things as they are. And that can be difficult for people.
Well, let me answer this, because now that we're getting into this, I have had a number of conversations. I've been in a Qigong class where there was a lot of discussion of these kinds of concepts. And the thing, and I don't mean to turn the tables on you at all, but I'm just curious about this. There is a drive in me, and I would guess because you actually decided to do this podcast, there's a drive in you to actually act in the world, right? There's a desire in me to pursue these ideas I have about working with dreams and to work with people and to be engaged in that way. Now, I've always not quite understood where that individual, for lack of a better term, and I don't know if this is the right one, desire fits into sort of the idea of acceptance of the way things are. Because what am I doing? I'm trying to change the way things are, right? So I don't understand. Can you enlighten me a little bit on?
Are you trying to necessarily change the way things are, or are you trying to help people see the way that things are?
Well, I think the latter, but that always, in my experience, leads to people, we use the term grow or transform or become literally a larger version of who they are. Right. They see how things are and they go, oh, okay. One thing is, I don't want to behave that way anymore. Okay. Right. I see now what it is. I don't want to do that. I want to do this instead. Yeah. Right. So that's the part that I always got stuck on, because it feels to me like there's this drive somewhere in the human experience for something.
Right. And see, you know what? This is an interesting conversation. It's funny you bring that up, because I struggle with that myself. I've struggled with the whole concept behind that. And I have a meditation teacher that I see weekly, and I'm in like meditation facilitator training, and I'm trying to do all these different things, and I've struggled with how can I put it? I've struggled with how do you reach, you want to have goals in life. You do want better for yourself. Obviously, that's, who doesn't, everybody wants to live the best life that they can. So the things that I've struggled with is, where do you draw the line with that? Like where do you draw the line with accepting things as they are, yet still wanting to make change in your life? How do you, where's the line at, and it's something I've struggled with and I still struggle with. So I wish I had a better answer for you because I think it's a pretty, one of the bigger questions in the Buddhist world is like, where is that line? Where do you say, okay, I accept things as they are, but still, have goals and aspirations? Like, do you just cross out your goals and aspirations and say, okay, well, I'm content to live like this forever? Or, that's something I myself have struggled with, and I still struggle with.
Well, we could even broaden the question out because, and I'm just exploring here. I don't have an argument, but we have something called GDP, gross domestic product, right? Mm-hmm. And we want to see that get bigger and bigger and bigger, year on year on year on year. Right? We want 3% growth, whatever. So this idea that things can grow and grow and grow and grow. Well, they can't, right? I mean, there's 8 billion people in the world, or there will be soon, and there's only so much stuff. And at some point, that idea doesn't work.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, it's not working anymore now anyway, right? I mean, one of the things that I've experienced in the last year is I totally downsized. I moved into a house that's a third the size of the house I was living in. And I've discovered there's a lot of stuff I don't need that I thought I needed. Mm-hmm. However, as we've just said, I do have goals, that are much less attached to accumulation of stuff. Right. Than they used to be, right? So that's a change. And I think a healthy one for me.
I would say a positive change.
Yeah. But I think one of the, maybe the struggles that we're having is that, which is really where we started this conversation with, which is that we have this construct, this idea economically of growth all over the world. That's how people measure the economic health of a society. Is it growing? Which means, is it producing stuff that people buy?
Right.
And so, I don't have any more solution than anybody else I get. Well, maybe other people do, but in terms of our conversation, it's like, I look at that and I know that's not sustainable. And I don't mean from an ecological perspective. I mean, it's just, at some point there's enough stuff. Right? At some point, you don't need to continue to grow. You got to take care of what you have.
Right.
So I think that's another shift that we're being faced with, and that may help us answer the question, what does it mean to have goals? Because our goals shift, right? Our goals shift and change. So I don't know. I mean, it is an interesting conversation, and it's like everything else, I think it's one of the things that's going to come to a head, along with, our economic system and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, well, I'm glad I asked you because, well, let me ask you another question.
Sure.
Because I've been thinking about this. So in my mind, there are sort of two classes of drugs. Mm-hmm. There are hallucinogens like LSD and psilocybin and MDMA to some degree, and sort of that class of drugs that became, illegal under Nixon. Right. And we had the war on drugs, right? And then there are other drugs that I guess some people call hard drugs like heroin and cocaine, which don't have the hallucinogenic properties, which seem like they may have some really good applications for people. There's a lot of studies in Israel and so forth on trauma and such. Okay. What is your view about, I don't know, this is just a hypothetical. What if we legalized everything? What if we said, you're not going to get arrested or go to jail. We're going to regulate and tax this stuff. Is that a situation, because the reason people have said is, oh, no, we can't do that because there are people who have this addiction problem and they would go crazy and we'd have a real issue. I don't know. What's your thought, as somebody who's recovering, what's your thought about that?
I think the only real solution to the drug issue is widespread either legalization or decriminalization. And for it to be basically, as you said, taxed and regulated. I think if people were given a safe place to do the drugs that they do, I think that ultimately it would make the world a safer place. It would take a lot of the crime element out. We've already got the methadone program, across the world, here in America for sure. And what is that but government subsidized dope, basically,
Right.
But it helps a lot of people, get out of the criminal aspect of heroin use and other types of drugs, mostly heroin when we're talking about methadone. But I think as far as any kind of actual real world solution, I think that is the only solution, because that, and just, like you said, especially with addiction, we've got to stop treating people like criminals. These are people with problems. These are people with mental problems that have chosen to use drugs to self-medicate.
Yeah.
To try to feel better, to change the way they feel because they can't deal with the way that things are. Their reality has become too much for them. So they're looking for some sort of escape. And I think, you can, like I was saying earlier, you can find escape in anything, whether it be drugs or alcohol, whether it be the gym, whether it be playing golf every day, whatever it is. It's people looking for an escape. I think that the only real solution is legalization and to stop incarcerating people who ultimately need help. These are people with mental issues, and especially with hallucinogens. I think hallucinogens should have, never been made illegal in the first place. I think that there's a lot of benefits associated with hallucinogens. There's been lots of studies, as you said, that are currently being done, and they're starting to increase more and more. There's MDMA has been shown to just do wonderful results for, ex-military with PTSD. They don't even have to be ex-military, but psilocybin, psychedelic mushrooms have been shown to be, I think, 20 times more effective at fighting depression than most of the depression meds that are on the market today.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
I think that all drugs, and this might sound completely insane, I think that there is a use for all drugs. I think that in the proper application, every one of them has a use.
I think you're right. What was I going to tell you? Oh, so there's a guy, Michael Pollan.
I'm familiar.
Yeah. So he wrote this book, How to Change Your Mind, right? And what was brilliant about the book was that Michael Pollan is not a druggie, right?
Yeah.
He just had no experience.
Right.
He's also, he's a reporter. I mean, like a real reporter. So he went and he had some of these experiences. And one part of the book is about what happens in your brain. And so there's this thing called the default mode network, which I think is made of about 6 different parts. And basically it's the part of your brain that sort of dumbs you down, right? From the standpoint that if you see a folding chair, you're not going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what it is. You got a catalog in your head. You know what a folding chair is. That's that. You take a 2-year-old and show them a folding chair for the first time. They're going to spend an hour, right? It's like, wow, this thing folds, all this stuff. Okay. All right. So, and this part of your brain consumes a tremendous amount of energy, right? A lot of oxygen goes to this part of your brain. You take a hallucinogen, what happens? The default mode network goes offline, shuts down.
Right.
And different parts of your brain start talking to each other. That's why you have these experiences where you can see music and smells and all this kind of stuff, right? And I want to get back to the MDMA thing in a minute, but so what occurred to me was, I wonder if this experience is not very similar to the dream experience. And the dream experience obviously is not quite as technicolor, but we make associations in the dream where we basically reformat our biographies, right? We take ourselves when we were 5 and put ourselves in the office in a suit and a tie, whatever it is, right? People who have passed away, they're alive, your father's younger than you are, whatever it is, all this stuff, which doesn't, quote, make any sense, right? It's not the biography that we live when we're awake. I haven't seen any research, but I'm curious about whether or not this aspect of our brain basically gets taken offline, because it's the more recent development, over thousands of years that we put this together. The thing about MDMA, which, and I'm basically basing this on a Israeli study that this guy Tim Ferriss promoted, and you can see it free, I think, still on his website.
Yeah.
And it's exactly as I don't know, have you seen it?
Yeah. I'm very familiar with Tim Ferriss, actually.
Oh, okay. So that was amazing. I mean, there were 3 people, who had very horrific experiences. The thing I'm not quite sure people understand is a little bit past the headline. MDMA is useful, with PTSD. Right. What happens? These people go back into the experience. It is not a walk in the park. No. I mean, it is tough stuff. But what it's telling us is that trauma is not to be avoided in terms of integrating the experience and dealing with it and placing it in a way that allows us to lead a normal life again. What we need to do is go experience the trauma, understand the fear, right, and understand literally, viscerally, that we're okay. And on a very sort of benign level, in the coaching world, there's something called the inner critic, which drives me crazy. What's an inner critic? Well, it's this part of you that's saying, oh, don't do that. You'll fail. You're not good enough, blah, 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 right? That's a critic. We got to overcome that. Yeah. And what I keep trying to say to people is that's not true. This part of you that you probably developed when you were like 4 saved your life. Because as a 4-year-old, all you could think of was, okay, if I accept that I'm the bad one, then I know what's going to happen. And I know the beginning, middle, and end of what's going to happen. And so I'll be the bad one.
Right.
And now you get, you're 35 years old, you're still saying you're the bad one. Well, you're not, but that strategy is not a bad part of you. It's the part of you that was trying to survive.
Right.
So honor that part of you. Embrace that part of you. Now, I know it's a big jump from PTSD to that idea, but they're the same concepts.
Right.
It's not that this is bad, horrible, terrible. You should somehow medicate it or deal with it in a way that you don't have to deal with it. No, you embrace it. It is part of your humanity. It is part of how you try to survive. And when you do that, and it's, again, I watched this documentary, it was like, boy, that's tough stuff these people did, but 2-3 MDMA sessions and they were back to life, It's amazing.
Yeah.
So I just, I think it's important for people to understand it's not like, psychedelics make everything wonderful. No. But they allow you, they basically tear you apart to the point where you can get to this aspect that is causing you pain.
Yeah, they're incredibly introspective.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I've had a lot of experience with psychedelics, actually, and they've been for me nothing but beneficial. But for that reason, it really helps to get to the root of the issues. As you said, it tears you down in a sense so that you can rebuild yourself in a healthier way, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But we were talking about the inner critic and the like that inner monologue that you get, and man, I'm for sure, for lack of a better term, guilty of that, because the mind inclines itself to what you subjected to, and I think especially in those formative years, so you've got Group A and Group B. In Group A, you've got people whose parents were, very loving and supportive and present, and you were given praise and told, oh, you can do anything. And then in Group B, you've got this group who, maybe they came from a a divorced home, and they didn't see their parents very much, and they've got these abandonment issues. And, for maybe they were told that they, unfortunately, that they were told, that they were a loser or something, and this is that becomes your inner monologue. That becomes that inner critic. That becomes the dialogue that you experience forever, because that's in those formative years, you hear something enough, you start to believe it.
Sure.
And unfortunately, for group B, when, you're told you can't accomplish anything and you're less than, and you're a loser, or whatever the chosen terms were, here you are, 35, 39, 45 years old, and you're still like kicking the shit out of yourself, basically, because you genuinely believe that about yourself, like, well, I'm a fucking loser, well, and, and man, it can be, it can be devastating for people.
Yeah, and it is. And I think the way to deal with that, as I was saying, is to look at that and understand that strategy of describing yourself as a loser, accepting what you were told, was the only way that you could exist. I mean, you could rebel and say, I'm not a loser. You probably get your brains kicked in. Right? So you learn very quickly, okay, here's the deal. If I describe myself as a loser, then I can predict what's going to happen.
Right.
In my family.
Yeah.
And what I think is really important is that people don't look at that and say that's a bad part of myself.
Right.
No, it's not the bad part of yourself. It's the only strategy you could put together.
Right.
Right. So you need to honor that in yourself. You need to say, look, I did the best I could in those circumstances.
Right.
I'm not in those circumstances anymore.
Yeah.
So I don't need that strategy anymore, but I'm not going to condemn it. As a matter of fact, in their techniques, you can literally have something called the internal family systems model, which is very interesting. You can have conversations with aspects of yourself to say, thank you. I appreciate the fact that you got me through my childhood. Right. I'm okay now. Let's find something else for you to do. And it just takes a couple of those conversations, and you can begin to move on. The other thing about it, I think, Justin, is that for a lot of us, that worthlessness is hardwired, right?
Yeah.
So it's always going to come up. The issue is, how much room do you give it?
Right.
So again, what I'm always saying to my clients is, we got to get you different experience. We got to get you out there with people you don't know, who are going to respond to you in a way that's going to be a surprise to you.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have less time. This stuff is going to come up, I mean, there's a woman I have as a client. It makes me nuts. There are so many people asking her, she's an artist. Oh, would you do this? Would you do that? And she turns them down. She doesn't show up. And it's like, but they keep coming because she does enough work that's really brilliant.
Right.
But that's her story from, when she was a kid, which is nobody wants her, even though they're begging her to do this work. So logic isn't going to get her out of this, right? The only thing that's going to get her out of this is to go get the experience, just to, in this case, have me and his audience saying, you can't say no for the next week. You got to say yes. Let's get you that experience. And it's going to give less space for this part of you that has a strategy that says the way to get through life is to be rejected, because that's what you know. You don't know this other stuff. This other stuff could be dangerous. You don't know who these people are. Right. You don't know how this is going to work out, right? So the problem, I think, with a lot of, certainly in the coaching world, is we use, again, language is important. We describe this part of ourselves as a bad thing. It's not a bad thing.
Right.
You got to honor it. It's a good thing. It saved you.
It's like your built-in protection system, basically, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just not useful right now.
Right. It no longer serves you. Yeah.
Yeah.
It can be so hard to break out of that narrative, though. Yeah.
It is. And it really has to do with experience. It really has, like I was saying to you before, dream alone, insight alone is useless, right? So for example, I could work with somebody for 3 years and keep coming up with examples where their strategy stopped them. But unless we can get them to go do something, it's pointless.
Yeah.
Because all it is up here. Oh, yeah, I understand it now. You can understand it from now until the cows come home. You got to do something. You have to get experience that allows you to experience yourself differently.
Right.
And allows you to have to embrace the experience that other people show you of who you are, which is not who you've decided you are or somebody else decided who you were.
Yeah.
Right. That's hard. You're right. And that is, I know I was knocking coaching, but that is the really brilliant part of coaching, which is, guess what? Let's do something.
Right.
Let's set a goal. Let's accomplish something. And then you're going to see that who you think you are is not who anybody else thinks you are. So who's right and who's wrong here,
Yeah. Man, that's a touchy that's a touchy point for me. I'm one of those people that grew up hearing all that shit, it still rears its ugly head from time to time,
Yeah.
I'm trying to make peace with it, I've been fighting it for many years, just trying to fight it away, but like you were saying, that you can't really fight it away. You kind of have to embrace it almost and just accept it for what it is, that it was there to protect you and that it isn't needed anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up with a father who knocked the crap out of me on a regular basis.
That's stepfather for me.
Okay. So I don't know why, but when I was about 9 years old, I thought, okay, I got to take this, but nobody is ever going to victimize me again, right? So my stepping into the world as an adult was from the framework of conflict. Now, I didn't get into fist fights in bars. There was nothing physical about this.
Right.
But emotionally, my going in position was, don't mess with me, right? I'm not that big a guy, it's not like but psychologically, there was an attitude.
Yeah.
And that attitude actually was very beneficial in some ways because people didn't mess with me. But it also stood in the way of any real kind of intimacy or vulnerability or anything like that, right? Mm-hmm. So we can take these sort of structures that we grow up with, that we formulate and move into the world. And the problem is they don't really work anymore. And they're also not true, right? It wasn't true that I had to go overwhelm everybody.
Right.
It wasn't true. First of all, it wasn't even possible, So, and it took a while because, as you say, this is not an easy walk, right?
Yeah.
It took a while for me to get it. Oh, I've been living some bullshit here.
Yeah.
And it actually isn't very nice to me or anybody else. And here's the other thing, there's this idea of the wound, which is real, I think. You've been wounded, I've been wounded. But there's another way of thinking about it, which is we can stay in what I would call the lie of the wound, right? You can stay in that you're worthless. I can stay in that I got to fight with everybody.
Right.
It's a lie, right? But we've got file drawers of legal briefs of why it's true, right?
Oh yeah.
So it's just a question of when do you want to give it up,
right. Yeah.
And for some of us, it takes longer than others of us, and it's a mixed bag. It's not all one thing, right? It's like I can look back on my life and I can see a lot of combat and I can also see a lot of compassion. I can see, we have many varied experiences. It's just, what do you want to focus on, And we focus on what we know because it's comfortable, even though it's horribly uncomfortable. At least we know what it is.
Right.
We resist the other stuff because we don't know what the hell it is. And what I think is brilliant actually about you doing this podcast is exactly what you said to me, which is you want to get these different perspectives, right? Well, that doesn't come from the description you had as a kid, right? There's no room for that.
Yeah.
So there's this other aspect of you that goes, okay, I'm going to experience myself in a different way. See what that's about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the weird thing about it is, these narratives that we kind of grew up with and have made, kind of help shape your identity in a sense, that
Sure.
inner monologue is, just like you were saying, none of that shit is true, man. But like convincing yourself that none of that's true is the really difficult part. And trying to traverse that is where it can get kind of hairy, because, like I grew up hearing, all the negative bullshit about myself and believed it for a long time. And even now it still pops up, but I know it's not true. Like I've done a lot of interesting things with my life. I've accomplished a lot of things. I've helped a lot of people, and I know I'm not a loser, but every now and then in the back of my head, there it is again, and
Yeah. Well, just, if there's any comfort, it lives in all of us.
yeah, it's not very comforting, but
well, I think, back to what you were saying earlier, it's like if we remove the stigma and the criminalization of a particular set of addictions, and I think it's important to understand that it's just a particular set of addictions, because there are lots of other addictions that people don't get in trouble for.
Yeah.
If we did that, that would be a step in the right direction. And you see, I'm not sure if this is true or not, but I think I read that Oregon has just legalized everything.
Yeah, decriminalized absolutely everything.
Yeah. So, it's slower than it should be, but it's starting to happen. And also in parallel, what's happening is we are seeing, the positive effects of these psychedelics. And the reason, the Nixon administration wanted them criminalized is because they saw people, it's kind of like we were talking about before. It's like people are waking up to stuff. Well, you take a hallucinogen and you really cannot understand why we would be bombing somebody else's country. It doesn't make any sense. You get that insight. It makes no sense. I was saying to somebody, or actually it was a comment on one of my YouTube videos, we're considered the greatest country in the world, but if you look at any measure, whether it's healthcare, education, or housing, or whatever, we're not number one.
Not by a long shot.
Yeah, but here's where we are number one. We have the biggest, baddest, kick-ass army in the world because we spend, 10 times what anybody else spends on it. The fact of the matter is, though, we have not won a conflict since World War II, except for Grenada. We haven't won. We've blown up people's countries, but at the end of the day, we leave. And I don't know, there's no victory parade anywhere. Right. So we have to begin, I think, to understand this idea of force. And what is the ethical use of force? Because obviously forcing people not to take drugs doesn't work. People take drugs.
Right.
Yet we do want to force people to stop at the stop sign, right? That's an ethical use of force. If you don't stop at the stop sign, we're going to take your license away.
Right.
If that doesn't work, we'll take your car away. If that doesn't work, we're putting you in jail, right? So there are areas where force is a reasonable response. But if there's something that we don't understand in this country, it's the ethical use of force. We just think force is the way you get people to do things.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that's a pretty widespread way of thinking in this country for sure. That if you want something, you have to go out and just force it.
Yeah, right. And what's remarkable is it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It does not work. So that's another thing I think that will be very interesting in the months and years coming is like, are we gonna change that idea? Are we gonna start talking to people who, we have demonized? And there were some efforts with Iran and Cuba, but there needs to be a lot more. We'll see what happens.
Yep, I guess we will. As long as we're here, we'll hope. I don't know, man. Times are getting weird. Not that they haven't always been weird, but it's been an interesting year for sure for everybody.
Yep, absolutely.
So, where can people find you at, Will?
Best way, I guess, is my website, which is my name. It's willsharon.com, WILLSHARON, and that's got my YouTube library, my Instagram stuff. It's, if people want to work with me, describes what that process is about. Or on YouTube, my name, or on Instagram, my name, that's where I am. And also, I should mention, I always forget this. I wrote a book. Hold on a second. I don't have a copy handy. It's called Dreaming in the 21st Century, and it's got a lot of the concepts that we've talked about. And it's not a big psychological theory deal at all. It's short 3 to 5 page chapters, just to give some people some ideas of how they can more fully experience this aspect of who they are. So, and that you can find on my website as well.
Right on. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, man, I really appreciate you sitting and taking the time to talk to me. I've had a really good time with this conversation, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
Me too. And I enjoyed it a lot. I appreciate it. Thanks so much, man.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Well, I sincerely hope that everyone enjoyed listening to that episode as much as I enjoyed making it. Unfortunately, I've still been unable to get in touch with Will, but I will be posting links to his videos and his book on dharmajunkiepodcast.com. If you enjoyed listening, please rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and tell a friend. Once again, this has been Dharma Junkie. I'm Justin Otto. Namaste.
Chaos is beautiful.